take us to Azerbaijan, a country most people in the United States hardly know about, let alone where it is. Why it is so significant in terms of global oil pipeline politics?
It's very significant because, on the one hand, it holds a significant chunk of the world's oil market, about 1%, which doesn't sound very much, but it does swing the price in many ways. And on the other hand, it's a state on the western side of the Caspian Sea that plays the dominant position for the West's or Western oil companies and Western governments' intervention into the Caspian region. It's the most secure, as it were, bridgehead for the West in the Caspian region.
Place it exactly for us there.
It's almost middle way between the top and the bottom of the Caspian Sea on the western coast of the Caspian. Its offshore area stretches over to the Turkmen offshore area, and its western edge runs onto Georgia, and the northern edge is Russia, and southern edge is Iran.
Now, the route is very treacherous. It goes through mountainous regions. It cuts through aquifers. Can you explain why it goes all the way up to Turkey instead of, say, closer to Iran or even to China?
That's a very, very interesting question. Of course, there was a huge debate about which way oil would be exported from the Azeri fields after the collapse of the Soviet Union. It was in the interests of Western states, particularly the US, to try and run that oil out of the Russian sphere of influence and Russian sphere of control. And the State Department was the key driver for the creation of this route. From the point of view of the oil companies, it would have been easier for them to run it through Russian pipelines. There was a big push for them to run it through an Iranian pipeline or create an Iranian pipeline. But it was the State Department that drove the political requirement that it should be exported to the global market through a space which didn't run through Iran, didn't run through China, and didn't run through Russia. And they drove the idea that this should be pushed. It wasn't actually in the interests of the oil companies, particularly in the first instance.
Now, the Caspian Sea is a very significant area for the United States. It doesn't have the largest marine base there.
That's right. That's correct. I mean, I think what's interesting is that when it was being developed in the early 90s, when it was being pushed in the early 90s in political spheres, it was talked about as being a huge new space of oil and gas production on the scale of Saudi or whatever. Actually, in reality, the amount of oil and gas in the Caspian and the immediate shore is nothing like that. But part of the reason why it was pushed at that scale, I think, was because it was part of a wider geopolitical intent from the US and the Western powers to, in a sense, roll back the developments and territorial acquisitions that had been made by Russia in the 18th century.
And why is pipeline so important? Talk about the politics and laws around pipelines. Pipelines
are very often used as a significant geopolitical tool like this one. The route that we take, myself and Mika Minio, writing a book for a platform, which is out of the general activity and research of our work over the last 10, 15 years, goes not only through the pipeline in the Caucasus, in Azerbaijan, Georgia and Turkey, but also through another pipeline which runs from Italy through Austria to Germany and takes oil from near Trieste to a set of oil terminals and refineries in southern Germany, Austria and Czech Republic. That earlier pipeline, built in the 1960s, was also a geopolitical project. It was part of the structure for the West, of NATO, to create an energy supply system which would, in a sense, mirror and be a rival to the energy supply systems that were being created in what is now known as the former Eastern Europe. Russia and the Soviet Union was pushing very hard for oil production to be driven to those states from Siberia, and what was happening in the West was a parallel pipeline. In both those cases, it was created really as a political tool more than primarily a commercial tool. Political to? The Western powers in this instance, both in Europe and in the Caucasus.
So, Anna, I wanted to ask you, so the oil giant BP plays a huge role. They operate this pipeline. Can you talk about their history in Azerbaijan?
So BP first broke into Azerbaijan after the Soviet Union started falling apart. Some of the first contracts were signed in 1992, and the interesting thing is you'll find that BP were actually there before they've established their own relations with Azerbaijan before the Western governments actually did, and BP already had an office in Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan, before any of the Western governments had embassies. And for a while, in fact, they invited the British diplomats to come and share an office with them. And then what BP did, they recruited the British state to work on their behalf to help them break into this new territory and sign lucrative contracts. The president of Azerbaijan at the time, Elchi Bey, was, as we've found out from some documents that we got out of the British Foreign Office under freedom of information legislation, the president of Azerbaijan was a big fan of Margaret Thatcher. And so even though Mrs. Thatcher was no longer Prime Minister in the UK, the BP requested that she be brought over and help sign these contracts. So Margaret Thatcher got flown over from Hong Kong, where she was at the time on a trade visit as well. She got flown over from there to Baku and personally handed over the signature bonuses to the president and made sure that the contracts were signed. So this is part of a pattern that we see around the world where British as well as American and other Western governments act on behalf of their oil companies to break into new territories, to sign contracts that will sign away various different countries' oil for their profit.
I mean, BP, British Petroleum, has quite a sordid history. Didn't the U.S. And recent declassified CIA documents prove this? Overthrow the first democratically elected leader of Iran in 1953, Mossadegh, on behalf of BP, British Petroleum, as it was known then, or Anglo-American Oil, I think it was called then.
Absolutely, this is a really long history, but also we need to remember that now BP is more than just a British company. It is almost as much an American company as it is a British one, and in fact, more of BP's shares are listed on the American market than on the British one.